Hello everybody, it's Ben Cooper here from German to Welton Arkale, and I want to talk to you briefly about encouraging creativity. So creativity is one of the areas of the ACPs, which stands for the Advanced Cognitive Performance Characteristics that are identified in our high performance learning program that we're working over this year and next year to becoming accredited with world-class schooling status. And creativity makes up one of the major skills that the children need to acquire in order to be successful in the future. And I'm going to explain a little bit further about how we encourage creativity during this workshop, but why it's also important. So before we do, what I would like you to do is have a quick look at these two pictures, and I'm going to ask you to be creative, to think creatively. I want you to guess if the pictures were to be completed, what would they be of? So what would the one on the left be of if it was to be finished, and what would the one on the right be of if it was to be finished? I'm going to just give you a couple of minutes. You can pause the video if you like, and then we'll move on. Have a go. So that was an activity, an example of how we can encourage creative thinking. So the idea was that you could look at those marks and imagine what the completed picture would be. Now, over this workshop, I'm going to show you how you can approach this activity in different ways, using different skills that develop creative thinking. Because what high performance learning does is break down creativity into 5 specific skills or attributes that we want to encourage within our children in order to develop their creativity. So the first question we have to ask ourselves is why creativity? Why is it so important? So Treffinger in 1980 identified these 4 key reasons of why creativity was important. Number 1 was it helps children to be effective when we are not around. It helps them be independent. It helps them solve problems. It helps them self-support themselves. Number 2, it creates possibilities to solving future known and unknown problems. And I think due to the current situation with the coronavirus, that's more evident than ever that people are required to resolve everyday issues using their creative thinking. And indeed, there will be future known problems, but there will also be problems presented and we haven't predicted, and that we will need to solve both our everyday problems, but also in terms of those wider, more global issues. Number 3, it leads to powerful consequences, so it can lead for children to be far more successful in the future. It can lead to success in many different ways, both personal and kind of extrinsic type of success. And the final thing is actually creative thinking and being creative actually directly links to a greater satisfaction of life and enjoyment. And so ultimately, being creative is fun. And so we want to ensure that all our children develop those creative skills, that they can enjoy themselves, but also are set up to being successful in the future. So on top of that, the World Economic Forum identified that creativity in 2020 was the 3rd most desirable skill for employees, and also the 3rd highest rated skill that would support people being successful in the future. One of the most important skills for future success. And so you can see that we've got complex problem solving, critical thinking, and then behind that creativity. Whereas in 2015, it was actually just number 10. So creativity over the past 5 years has developed to being one of the most desirable attributes for our students in terms of employment, in terms of potentially being set up to be successful in the future. One of the key, 2 of the key things that are talked about in terms of creativity is that in the future, many of our children will be creating careers, not applying for them. So they'll be designing their own career paths and creating their own products, etc., in order to develop their own careers. A perfect example of that is things like Facebook and Instagram, on all the tech startups that have taken over the world in the past kind of decade. Those careers were obviously created, and it is predicted really that those type of career paths and designing, creating your own products to sell in many different forms is only going to increase. And actually in the future, people are far more likely to be creating their own careers rather than applying for a career within a field that already exists. And that directly links to the increase in enterprise and entrepreneurship, startups, freelance, and indeed micro jobs, where people perhaps won't just have one career, but they'll have maybe 2 or 3 different jobs that support their income. You know, if you think about the world in terms of blogging and writing articles for different magazines, many people create their income from various sources and are self-employed, but actually receive their fees and their income from various sources. And it is predicted that actually our children, as they grow up, will develop into this world where they will have to support themselves through micro jobs and freelance and startups, etc. And so it's really important, as I said before, that creativity is a skill that we focus on both within the school and encourage outside of the school as well. So ultimately, it should be our focus for both schools and as parents to encourage creativity. Notice the title of this session is not about teaching creativity, because it's very difficult to teach, but actually encouraging creativity. Creativity is spontaneous. It can't be taught. And so really our focus is on creating a culture of creativity, creating conditions in which creativity can thrive, and nurturing creativity, as well as the critical thinking side of things that go alongside. And so really what this session is about is how we do that both in school and outside of school, and what skills and attributes do we focus on in order to encourage and develop an environment of creativity. So I'm now going to go through the 5 different skills that Deborah Eyre, the founder of High Performance Learning, identifies for creativity, and talk through what that kind of looks like. Before I do, this is Bloom's taxonomy. So, and this is a very famous piece of research that talks about the idea of understanding, and we can have lots of different levels of understanding. We can know things, we can understand things, we can apply things, but ultimately, in order to develop a really deep, rich knowledge of something, it's about creating, synthesizing and evaluating. So when we're looking for children to create, we're looking at them to access these type of verbs and conduct these type of verbs. So we want children to revise things, to rewrite things, to set up things, to reconstruct, to relate, to write, to tell, to comply, to design. All those verbs we want our children to be doing on a day-to-day basis in school and outside of school in order for them to develop in their creativity. We don't just want children to be remembering things, for example. Okay, so the first skill that Deborah Eyre identifies as a really important skill that leads to creativity, or is an aspect of creativity, is fluent thinking. That links back to the activity I gave you at the beginning of this video, is the ability to generate ideas. So how many ideas or how many pictures could you think of that perhaps these pictures would evolve into when they're completed? And really, when we're looking at children and people developing these ideas, we look at opportunities for children to brainstorm and create kind of spider diagrams of all their ideas. We sometimes call it blue sky thinking, and it's just the idea of coming up with as many ideas as possible. And the key thing to remember with fluent thinking is it's not just settling on one idea. Sometimes it's quite easy to think of an idea, say, I know I'm going to do this, and go with it. But sometimes actually, if you think of more than one idea, it actually gives you a greater range of approaches to a certain problem or solution or a way of working. And the key thing is, and this is probably most important for some of our younger children, is it doesn't matter if the idea is viable or not. So if the children think of an idea and it's not very realistic, it's a little bit silly perhaps, it doesn't matter. It's an idea in itself, and it's still a skill to be able to think of ideas and go with them. So when we're talking about fluent thinking, we want to remove that barrier of fear of getting things wrong and encourage the idea of creating lots of different ideas and suggestions towards whatever topic we're talking about. So in this case, it was those 2 pictures, but it could be any topic or subject, both in school and outside of school. Okay, the next skill is flexible thinking, the ability to abandon one idea for a superior one or generate multiple solutions. So I've tweaked the task now. So I've got the pictures here, exactly the same, but what I've done is I've added a phrase which says, here comes trouble. So out of all those ideas of what you thought the picture might be when it was finished, you might suddenly realize that perhaps if we were to say that that is a blurb or a caption for those pictures, that might then change what you think were good ideas and what you think were less good ideas. So if you said, for example, on the right, it looks like a clothes peg, that probably doesn't match with here comes trouble, unless you really fear putting out the washing And really, it might then say, well, actually, it looks a bit like a barking dog. And the left-hand side, actually, now I think it looks perhaps like a shark fin. Because of the caption, here comes trouble, some of your ideas will be more valid than others. And really, that's what flexible thinking is about, is having lots of ideas. Once you've got all these ideas, it's being able to say, well, actually, I thought it looked like a closed pig, but perhaps now, because I know that the caption is here comes trouble, I'm going to go with a barking dog. And that's what flexible thinking is about. It's being able to consider different ideas and choose the correct one. Also looking at what method or what idea is most effective or will link to the best outcome. And that's really important for children to be able to adapt those ideas and evaluate those ideas to choose one that's going to be most suitable. Okay, so number 3 is intellectual playfulness. So the ability to recognize rules and bend them to create valid new thoughts. And notice that the key word is not break rules, but bend the rules. So, for example, what I have done with a picture, the original I've put in small at the top, but what I've actually done is flipped those pictures round so they are now upside down. I never said, when you were looking at those pictures and thinking what they could be, that they were the right way up. And so by bending those rules and thinking a bit outside the box, the pictures may now look like something completely different. So we might see that rather than being a shark fin, it is a whale's flipper, perhaps, or a dolphin's flipper. It might also be that it looks like a spade or a trowel. And on the left-hand side, it now might mean that it looks like something completely different. So by manipulating the rules and thinking a little bit outside the box, we're demonstrating intellectual playfulness. And so what does that look like in the classroom? So it's children, bending, perhaps breaking some of the rules in order to be a little bit different. Common rules and ways of working can be adapted and changed, So yes, we teach in mathematics, this is the most effective column method, but why is it the most effective column method? And it might not be the most effective column method for one particular child. They might prefer to set it out slightly differently, and that's absolutely fine, because they're allowing their intellectual playfulness to think about actually what method is going to be most suitable for me. Yes, this is the way that I'm being told to do it. These are the rules behind it, but actually I want to bend these rules slightly in order to make it more suitable for me. A really great example of this is obviously writing stories and novels. So of course, they say that a lot of stories that are written, and films in particular, actually derive and can root back from one of Shakespeare's plays. They say actually no story is truly original. Actually, Shakespeare wrote them all. It's just that they've been adapted from there. So I'm sure that's a bit of a debatable topic, but nevertheless, it can't be denied that stories evolve and change and actually draw upon previous ideas. A traditional story will be that there is everything is okay at the beginning of the story, an equilibrium. There is then a problem or a challenge, and then a resolution, and then everything returns back to normal. Now, we know that actually by playing around with those rules and those stereotypes of what makes a normal story, we can actually have more exciting stories. So cliffhangers is a great way of actually ending a story before there is an equilibrium, leaving people hanging. And quite often movies and certainly series on the television use that story adaptation to hook people in so they tune into the next episode. But equally, sometimes we start stories with the problems or a resolution that really draws them in. So the idea is that that's a perfect example of authors and writers being intellectually playful with what is deemed as being the normal way of a story kind of flowing through, and actually playing around with it to make the story more interesting and less predictable. And so that's what intellectual playfulness is all about. And then we come to originality. Now, this is the one I find most difficult to get my head around, because it's really about creating brand new ideas. And really, there is any idea really completely original, or have you taken an idea and turned it into something else? And I suppose really that's what this one's all about, is originality is actually creating your own ideas, but not necessarily, but developing an understanding that actually you can draw upon other people's ideas. I think a perfect example of this is Uber, the app Uber, which is world famous. It's used all over the globe now. But ultimately that was a combination of two ideas, the taxi and the GPS. And the fact that actually by combining the two, you would solve a lot of problems in terms of taxi drivers trying to figure out where you were in the world, come and pick you up, and also where you wanted to go. It also resolved the issue of knowing trying to predict what your fare would be and making sure you had enough money, because it tied in obviously the automatic payment, but also it tells you how much your taxi ride is going to cost before you even book the taxi. And so that was really an original idea that drew upon other ideas that pre-existed. And so I've kind of demonstrated that in the fact that I've removed the drawings from the square. I've just left Here Comes Trouble with the idea that you can now come up with any picture you like that links to Here Comes Trouble. So you're using one idea, the caption, to develop and be original with your own creative thinking and come up with something completely original, not based upon what drawings already existed within the boxes. And that's what originality is all about, trying to come up with your own ideas and come up with something entirely new. So the final one, evolutionary and revolutionary thinking, which is a step on, but very closely linked to originality, in the fact that actually how do we take someone's ideas and create something new with it. So taking it one step on. And so really what this is about is drawing upon existing ideas and combining to create something innovative and new. So linking back to our narratives and our stories, we quite often in primary school get children to innovate a story. I suppose evolutionary and revolutionary thinking was the idea of teaching them a very formulaic story and getting them to apply that into a different context. So the 3 billy goats gruff in Dubai can turn into 3 camels in the waddies. So children learn about 3 billy goats gruff. They learn about all the story, they repeat over, they rehearse it, so they're very familiar with the original idea for the story, and then they innovate different aspects of it. So they change the characters, they change the goats to camels to make it more UAE relevant, Dubai relevant. And then, of course, they change the setting. Rather than going from field to field, they go from one side of the wadi to the other and cross over the bridge. And so that's really a simple example of evolutionary thinking, because it allows children to build on one idea and come up with something slightly new and innovative. And of course, I've shared the idea that actually this is what 2 children thought that the complete picture would be. So I asked them to draw it. And so they turned what we were discussing as the shark fin into an eye and a close-up of a part of a face. And then actually, interestingly enough, the clothes peg has been turned into a glass that's been spilled over. So I'm sure those 2 ideas were ideas that we'd never really thought of, but actually building on an idea and creating a new picture has allowed those children to think evolutionary and revolutionary by building upon previous ideas, previous drawings, and add to that to combine to create something completely new. And that really shows that, all these things can sound quite complex, but actually sometimes the simplest of activities that allow children to develop and encourage that creativity. So if I was to flip back to what Deborah Eyre lists in terms of her fact sheets of some kind of top tips for children and students and indeed adults, how to approach things a bit more creatively. So when you've got a problem, number 1, don't just do what you're asked to do. Look for what else you could do with the task or problem. Number 2, generate as many solutions as you can, particularly to a particular problem before choosing one. And that's all about brainstorming ideas, as we discussed. Number 3, even if you have a great idea or one you have used before, try dropping it and thinking of another one. So kind of don't always do what you've always done type question. I know there's a phrase that I've used with teachers before. If you always do what you always have done, then you always get what you always got. Which basically means if you constantly repeat the same thing, then you'll always get the same outcomes. Actually, sometimes it's useful to mix things up and try and do something different, because actually you might find out that the end is actually better than it was before. So number 4 is, can you think of a fresh or novel way to do this? Bring your own angle to it. Don't always aim for a radically different idea. Being creative isn't about creating something completely new and doing something completely mind-blowing that's going to change the world. It's those little bits of creativity every single day. Once you know the rules, try bending them to create something fresh. That's intellectual playfulness, trying to bend the rules and change them, etc. So even simple things like playing a board game, like snakes and ladders. Yes, the rules are that the snakes go down the ladders, but what other rules could be added to make the game more interesting? Why not? Could the ladders signify some other move? or some other happening that might make the game a bit more interesting. Number 7, not all creative ideas are good ones, so critique them, absolutely. So that's all about picking the best ones once you come up with ideas. Number 8, give it time. Yeah, absolutely. So it's really important to just creativity doesn't happen all at once. So leave opportunities to generate ideas. So when you're thinking of idea, go away, go and have a shower at home or have a bath and think about things. They actually say that boredom leads to creativity. And actually it's good for children and adults to be bored sometimes, because it's those times when there's nothing to do, where your mind wanders and you actually come up with great ideas to have other ways of entertaining yourself, and indeed of ideas of how you can make things better. I think actually the current climate in terms of COVID-19 and being in lockdown is showing that. If you only have to jump on Facebook and find all the bizarre and creative things that people are doing online to entertain themselves, it's a perfect example of how boredom and not having necessarily lots of things to do can actually lead to creativity. And the final one is just make sure it's fun. I think the key thing, especially for our younger children, is when children come up with ideas, even if they're a bit silly or a bit crazy, go with them, speak to them about them, have a laugh with them, talk to them, and then slowly draw out their ideas and make suggestions and have a discussion about their ideas, because it's only then that they're going to realise what is going to be what's valid and what's going to work and what's just actually an idea that perhaps won't work. But there's nothing wrong with coming up with ideas. What we don't want to do is stamp down on that creativity and stamp down on the development of ideas. Because if children are afraid of creating ideas because they'll be said, oh, don't be so, that's not a good idea, it's a silly idea, then actually we're destroying and potentially treading down on that creativity. And eventually that creativity will start to disappear, which is absolutely not what we don't want to happen for our young children. So make sure you just have fun with it. Creativity is a great skill to have, thinking outside the box, and as I say, it leads to some really enjoyable and exciting moments and discoveries. So encourage it and keep going with it. And I actually was asked a question yesterday, just to finish, was that, well, my child can't play the violin or he can't play the drums, or they're not very good at art. So, creativity isn't for them. So I did ask the question, is why is creativity just solely within the creative arts? And I think creative arts is the wrong way to put it. It's the arts. We can actually be creative with a whole manner of different things. You can, of course, be creative in mathematics, whereas mathematics links directly to things like coding and playing around with computer algorithms, etc. And of course, that's possibly one of the most creative fields currently in terms of the innovation of all the different applications and opportunities that the internet and devices and coding are presenting to us. And so you can be creative in any aspect of your life. So never let anybody tell you that you're not creative. What they're probably telling you is you're probably not as good at the arts as you might be at mathematics, for example. There's absolutely no reason why you cannot be creative within any field. So if there's one thing to take away from that, both parents and children, is that you can be creative in any situation or in any subject. So I hope this presentation has been useful. Please email me if you have any questions or thoughts or ideas, and I'll be happy to answer them for you. So have a really good day.